tired. I'm gonna end the stream. See you guys later. Thanks for watching. I'm just fucking with you. Welcome, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Mazarym broadcast. I am your host, as always, Mazarym. Welcome to tonight's rendition of Worldbuilding Wednesday. And if you're watching the VOD, hello, Nathan. How are you doing today? Thank you for joining me, my friend. If this is your first time watching, or if you're watching the VOD, you might be wondering, Mazarym, what is a Worldbuilding Wednesday? Let me tell you, or let me have Nightbot tell you. I'm doing all right, Nathan. Thanks. It's good. I'm glad you're doing good. But here's Nightbot. Hopefully, going to tell you. There you go. So that's what Worldbuilding Wednesdays are. We're going to be talking about Scoria. Scoria is a world my friends and I have been working on since middle school, approximately almost 10 years ago, which is very sad to think about. But with 10 years comes a lot of retconning and history and lore to talk about, which I'm very excited to share with you and make a bit on the stream about. So for tonight's topics, I wanted to talk about the Big Five. Who are they? What do they do? Who are their friends? As well as I wanted to reintroduce the world of Scoria, seeing that I came across an old, and I say old, like a couple months old, Google Doc that we tried to use for a script for an intro to Scoria video. So I think I want to do that live and then cut it up and then actually make it the intro to Scoria video. And then after that, there is a questionnaire I found from sfwa.org, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America website. Fantasy World Building Questions, People, and Customs by Patricia C. I'm going to say Red from 1996. A lot of really cool and in-depth questions that we could use to talk about the countries in Scoria. So I would go through that after we do those two bits for my country, Valmora, which we talked about briefly in the last segment of World Building Wednesday. So without further ado, I will present for you and for the Studio Scoria viewers in the near future a presentation on the Big Five. Let me just go here. Beautiful, beautiful. And so like with the last one, I will be hiding chat and alerts and myself, just so this will make it easier for me to export this onto YouTube as a video. So, let us do this. Just kidding. I keep doing that. You know what? I gotta get rid of this. Get rid of it. It's gone. Forget it. It never existed. Events list is gone. That was me showing off Obi-Wan from Battlefront stream. We gotta get rid of that. Get rid of this. Get rid of the alerts. Little buddy's going away. I'm going away. The border's going away. And also the dock protecting image, which blurred half of my shit last time, is going away for right now. Excuse me. Gosh. Got my notes over here. Beautiful. We're looking good. Alrighty. Okay. Let's do this. Gosh, how do I intro this? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Studio Scoria channel. My name is Mazarym, and today we're going to be talking about the Big Five. A brief history, who consists of the ranks of the Big Five, some of their allies across the world, and key events in the history of the Big Five. So, the Big Five were formed from the central players within the Allies, one of the two factions of the Second World War. Although one could argue this mutually beneficial alliance dates back further, and we'll see in a second what that means. And so together the Allies, the Big Five, formed the Scoria United Nations in 537 DE, a year following the end of the Second World War. They became permanent members of the Security Council, while the remainder of the allies they fought with constituted the First Nations of the General Assembly. The Big Five have dictated global policies for the past 80 years, and while this time frame was abound in road bumps, separate crises, civil wars, insurgencies, besides that, they've met little resistance in carving out their vision of a united, stable, and more peaceful world. So now let's go ahead and jump into let me talk about first. Let's talk about some of the key events leading to the formation of the Big Five first, because that's very important. I don't know why I included that. That should be for the next slide. So, a brief timeline of key events. So, first off, you have the Cantanian Revolution. So, the revolution in Cantus in 384 DE was the earliest instance of every member of the Big Five being in the conflict. So, you had on one side the Cantanian Republicans allied to the Vascorian Republic, the Nicterian Republic, and interestingly enough, the Vizardima Valmora against the Cantanian monarchists who were allied to the Kingdom of Guacu, the Fatez Sultanate, and the Kingdom of Niles. And then next coming up is the Great Valscorian War, sometime thereafter in 435 DE. This was actually a war where everybody who was involved in the Big Five in the present day was on different sides of the conflict. The Great Valscorian War was more of an interreligious conflict, so you had different branches of Theosism going at it, as long as Lahada sects, and also irreligious unaffiliated sects. So that's where the Nicterian Special Forces came in that war. And then next, having the Labokan War come up. This was probably the first instance of the modern Big Five members working together. This came, I would believe, 25-ish years before World War One, and this was a very major conflict in Laboka, which saw the end of the Fatez Sultanate, driven out by a force of the Nicterians, Vedians, Guakins, Valmorans, Cantanians, and the Volage Federation. Excuse me, the Volage Empire at this point. World War One was a conflict, obviously across the world, but primarily concerned itself with larger theaters in Talmair and Valscoria, and this saw the end of the Second Volage Empire. And then World War II saw the rise of the Pact of Steel, which was a large totalist coalition of countries. Very brutal war as well, and this saw the further reinforcement of the Big Five and its ranks and its strength. When we talk more about World War II, we'll further define who the Pact of Steel was and what their ideas and beliefs and larger players were. And then, as we discussed shortly thereafter, the formation of the Square United Nations came afterward. And now, finally, let's get into what nations make up the ranks of the Big Five. And this is in alphabetical order, so no particular order, just alphabetical order. First up, the Kingdom of Guacu, whose motto translates to honor those who honor you. Guacu is a large island nation located in northeastern Valscoria, led by King Aristides Pulakos, as well as Prime Minister Lucas Vitrus. Guacu is the home of Northern Orthodoxy, which is one of the main branches of Theosism, the other main branches being Reformed Theosism and Hellenic Catholic Theosism, both of whom we'll briefly touch on as well. They actually, in fact, fought to become the head of Northern Orthodoxy with other states, such as the Kingdom of Valmercia, which was located in southeastern Valmora before unification, as well as the Nasa, which was a large imperial state in Talmair. And they fought brief wars with them to cement themselves as the home and the head of Northern Orthodoxy. Guacu is also home to large sporting institutions such as the International Worldbuilding Federation, as well as the International Association of Gridiron, or also known as football. So more like American football in that case. Guacu also had a large empire at one point. The Guacan Empire spanned the Yamin Hellenic world, which included not only Guacu but Piravi, the island of Hrena, Wisdo, and parts of former Semandar, including Rethelhar and I believe Ulusonar. It also included Shagaria, which is a big, not an island, but a large state in continental Vasuna. And because of this, how could they get this empire, you might be asking? Guacu's always had a large and very intimidating naval fleet. In fact, the Guacans have made it their focus in education for their citizenry to become knowledgeable in a variety of maritime studies, from fishing to naval engineering. They also have a large and infamous ancient hostility with Wisdo, with several centuries of bloody conflict between them in and around their island countries, as well as Piravi, which is an island nation that sits between them. This conflict is often compared with the Hellenic myth of Tavos and Lavos. Tavos and Lavos were sons of Viator, the god of war. They were the gods of fear and madness, respectively, and they both basically just fought over and over with each other, and that's often equated to the conflict between Goaku and Wisdo. But yeah, that is Goaku for you. And moving on, we have Cantus. Cantus is another island nation in Valscoria, in the southwestern part of the region. The motto translates into from Cantanian, which is very closely related to Nycterium. The journey is clear, our ancestors have paved the way. It's a large, diverse island nation in southern Valscoria, as we discussed. It was once Doramic, so similar cultural traits to Valmora and parts of western Valscoria, but then ruled by Niter-speaking nobility, which evolved the language into what's now known as Cantanian. What's interesting is this language and culture stuck around, but however, following this period, a brief period of Narukami elites from Erlistris came over, married into the royal family of Cantus, and brought their way of life over with them, as well as the religion of dream conjuring. And this religion, as we would know later on, would stick around. So Cantus was a founding member of the Big Five, but left the group following the scandal known as Can't Exit. We'll have a more dedicated world building segment to talk about Can't Exit, but essentially a scandal formed after Cantus tried to prop up, or I should say they successfully propped up colonies in Kodwaria, which is a neutral region of the world, and got away with it for a long time. After repeatedly denying their territorial claims in Kodwaria, they left the group over those differences. Despite this, they still continue to work close with the Big Five and its allies, but more tending to trust their other Valscorian allies as opposed to some of the Talmeri ones. But what made Cantus a very important valued member of the Big Five when they were still a part of it was the very formidable air force and marine forces that they held. In fact, the Mako Sharks, which were a unit of Cantanian Marines, infamous for their swift and sudden intervention in the Solgari Civil War, which was during the 600s, early 600s. And so what did the Mako Sharks do? They disposed of Norumbuso Obokole, who was a infamous and deadly Solgari warlord. So that's Cantus for you. Next up, we have Nycteria. Nycteria's motto translates from Nycterian into liberty and equality over tyranny. Nycteria is a large democratic institution in Talmer. In fact, among the oldest democratic institutions ever in the world. So the country is led by President Lillian Malborn, and also led by the Speaker of the Assembly or the legislator Victor Solmar. Nycteria was one of the former strongholds of the Malinkan Empire. In fact, we'll talk about Malinka later in this list, as they're still affiliated with the Big Five. But in fact, Nycteria is also bordering by the coast. Malinka. I'm going to cut that out. Like I said, former stronghold of the Malinkan Empire, but this, however, changed with the Nycterian Revolution, which is a very abrupt and deadly and influential conflict that greatly transformed and inspired a lot of Talmeric countries that saw what was happening in Nycteria, inspired to then revolt and form democratic institutions of their own, seeing themselves as better fitting rulers than the kings that have been enthroned for hundreds and hundreds of years. Following the revolution, there was a notable, impactful but brief monarchist imperial period, which caused great disarray and war. I don't know the name of the conflict itself off the top of my head, but it may have been called the War of the Coalition or something similar. But essentially, what transpired was a coalition of Valscorian and Talmari countries teamed up, got rid of the Nycterian Emperor, whose descendants and supporters fled into Cantanian-held land in Valscoria, and formed what is now known as the modern Kingdom of Nihilius. Nycteria also has large and diverse metropolitan areas. Some entire districts of a city, in fact, can be dominated by one ethnic group at a time. A notable example would be Nolsgrad, which I believe is the largest city in Nycteria, is a sprawling and rich international hub, just littered with gleaming spires. Like I would say, when you conjure the image of Nolsgrad, similar to what you would think of like New York City and like downtown Manhattan. And so Nycteria's approach in the Big Five was largely diplomatic and reasonable to otherwise volatile world affairs before having to necessarily and absolutely resolve to deploy one of the most skilled and efficient special forces the world has ever seen. The Nigerian Special Forces include several infamous and famous groups such as the Black Badgers, the Night Owls, Task Force 48, and the famous Foreign Legion. So yeah, Nigeria speciality, you could say, is its special forces, and that's Nigeria. And now let's talk about their neighbors to the north, the Valdish Federation. The Valdish Federation's motto from Valdish translates to inseparable and indomitable. The president, Gerda Kestenhoff, is both the head of state and government, so more akin to what you might be familiar with in the United States, where the president is in absolute power despite being democratically elected, of the executive branch, that is. And so the Valdish Federation, even during its imperial age, was always a bastion of trade. So because of its location on the western coast of Talmere, it was a good port of entry for Visunan and even Raelian merchants to come into Talmere and sell their goods. In fact, several traders and merchants from southern Talmere and even the far north would meet in the middle in Valdish lands to trade. However, historically, the blob you're seeing now is, while it might be the present territory of the Valdish Federation, the Valdish Empire quite literally spanned across central Talmere, which made this much easier in the past. This Valdish Empire existed in two phases, but the latter half once ruled over much of central Talmere, as well as parts of Bosmaria, Cassavea, Laboca, and Illustrious. The aftermath of World War I saw it dissolved and birthed the present-day Valdish Federation as we know it now. And during the interwar period, further introduced more democratic institutions and even a volunteer legion that formed to help the Allies in World War II fight back against the Pact of Steel. And as we said with Cantus leaving the Big Five, it was the Valdish Federation that replaced them in 587 BE. And as far as militarily speaking, the Valdish Federation brings a lot of impressive and innovative artillery units, as well as logistical forces with the ability to disrupt and repair communications when necessary. So that's the Valdish Federation. Moving on, we have Valmora. Valmora's motto translates to forged out of conquest, created by peace. Valmora is an executive monarchy, quite literally, and arguably more authoritarian than the other members of the Big Five. That's for a lot of historical and cultural traditional reasons. The leader of Valmora is Vizoda Jacko II. However, there is a democratically elected institution in the parliament, and the leader of the government is Prime Minister Julia Alstogra. Valmora has always had a large martial spirit and proud warrior culture, which fostered ideas of chivalry, honor, and nobility across the several different kingdoms, because Valmora, for the largest part of history, was divided up until the War of Valmoran Succession, which occurred in the 190s and unified most of the island until fully unifying 200 years later, which then formed the Empire of Valmora. This empire governed over much of western Valscoria, as well as the islands of Alagosa and Cassavea, and the city-state of Maiko following the Labocan War. Valmora is a large bastion, but not the head of Northern Orthodoxy. This was largely in part due to the influence Guaku exerted onto eastern Valmora, whereas the western half of Valmora remains and is largely Catholic, but with unification, it was necessary for the incoming Western rulers to embrace Orthodoxy and cement it as the national faith. Valmorans speak Malinkan and Valmoran. However, Malinka was never present in a larger instance as its other territories. Malinka rather set up trading posts in the western part of the country, and because of their involvement in the War of Valmoran Succession, garnered a large influence and cultural, shall we say, positive sentiment. As you'll see, and with many other countries in this video, because of Malinka's empire and expansion, Malinkin is basically the lingua franca of Scoria, so a lot of countries do speak Malinkin in addition to their native languages. And what does Valmore bring to the table? Valmore is the largest army in the world and of its members in the Big Five. It spends a gross amount of money from its national budgets on maintaining and uh, propping up its large army known as the legions, which consist of thousands of soldiers each with their own storied histories, which depend on the battles they fought in or famous figures that came from their ranks or that they associate with. So that is Valmora. And last but certainly not least, in the Big Five lineup, we have Vedenum, whose motto translates to "We rose from the ashen sky." Vedenum is a constitutional republic led by President Madara Fonti, as well as the head of government being Alaramo Sarachi. In fact, it's interesting in Vedenum because the vice president and president are often from different parties. Um, this is mostly a gesture or a means of uh, reconciliation and diplomacy and peace between the once largely broken up islands that consist of the modern Vedian nation state. So it was obviously a large history of being broken up and reunified before finally being reunified formally in the War for Vedian Unification, which in fact sped up the unification process by forcibly invading neutral Vedian states. So they've always had on and off war with the Fatih Sultanate, who we've discussed a lot, as well as the Semandari Empire, which we may do a World Building Wednesday in the future when we talk about these empires that made considerable impacts throughout history. The Vedians speak Vescorian as well as speak Malinkan, but they also have a large minority of people that speak Nidi and Baralan. These were both from former colonies of the Vedian. They don't like to use the word empire, but it essentially, for all intents and purposes, was an empire. The Vedian Empire was a large republican imperialist ambition, which saw Vedenum govern over not only itself but the island of Severek, as well as Varala and Illustrious, and the western portions of Laboka. The Vedians also practiced Tarshishi reform Theosism, which we discussed earlier as a branch of Theosism that's a little more modern and reformed, as with the name, sort of akin to your Protestantism, specifically more Baptist than anything. And much like Iwaku exhibits a large navy, however, an arguably larger merchant fleet, and this merchant fleet allows them to be spread out across the world and be prepared for rapid marine response to violent outbreaks. So that's Vedenum. And now, let's talk about some of the other allies and partners. I mean, obviously, with 5 nations of considerable might and impact in the world, there is a lot to be said about their strength, but they can't do it alone. So this next category will detail the closest allies of the Big Five, and who are often prominent regional powers and whose interests align with the Big Five, thus culminating in the mutual vision of a safe and secure society. And much like the previous list, this is an alphabetical order, not so much in prominence of strength or power. So starting off, we have the Kingdom of Agalon, whose motto translates to the birthplace of heroes. Agalon is a constitutional monarchy led by Hakima, which is the word for king in Agalonic, Sikarus III, who was actually born Saif al-Muradi. The prime minister of Agalon is known as Himilko Basaredi. And Agalon is actually the largest Lahada nation in Valscoria. In fact, one of 2 Lahada sovereign states in Valscoria, in part due to the Fatih Sultanate. There are obviously other areas of Valscoria that worship Lahada, but there are no other sovereign entities that do. So a brief history of Agalon. It was first settled by ancient Vescorians and later Maramic Imperials. Maram is an island nation not too far from Agalon and pretty close to Vedenum and kind of, in fact, the link between Laboka and Valscoria, I would say. They were settled by Maramic Imperials, which gave rise to the Maramic language, later known as Agalonic, due to its differences as time would go on. And they would be converted to Lahada by proxy due to Maram's influence on Agalon. And this made it easier for the Fatih Sultanate to come in when... let me look up this figure real quick. This is a very important historical figure in the Fateh Sultanate that we have written down somewhere. Um, yeah, so in the Fateh's navy, one of the commanders, known as Hayati Burabasi, also known as the son of Marnus, who used the Fateh's navy to conquer over Kisilania, which is the island group which includes Agalon. So yeah, the Fateh's navy under Burabasi basically took over Agalon. Following this conquest, after centuries, there was a brief Cantanian invasion, which wasn't as successful, unfortunately, for the Cantanians. They did manage to convert a large sway to dream conjuring, which was interesting. But however, not too long after the Cantanian invasion, Agalon used the momentum of the Cantanian Revolution to declare themselves independent from the kingdom. Excuse me, to declare an independent kingdom from the Fontes. And as we see in modern times, Agalon is starting to look like a more reliable ally than Cantus, who occupy the same geographic sphere as them. But Agalon also has a more formidable air force of their own to be reckoned with. So that is Agalon in a nutshell. Give me one moment, please. Oh my god, that's... Yikes. Let me fix that. There we go. Yeah, that'll get cut out. Absolutely. I forgot I was in screen capture, not browser capture. That's a little... That's not good. That's alright, though. Nothing crazy got leaked. Alright. Okay. Okay. It's alright. We're back. Moving on. Bayonak. Bayonak, I honestly couldn't tell you what their Romano translates to. If I had to guess, it's in my defense, Theos, I defend. Theos is another word for God, especially in the Theosist religion. Sorry, give me 1 second. I apologize. Alright, back. Sorry. Dogs. That will definitely not make it into the recording. Why is chat still here? Fixed it. We're good. Okay. Professional streamer, by the way. Um. Anyways, so moving on, we have Bayonacht, whose motto translates into "My defense." God I will defend. That's his best, at least I have interpreted it. If you have another interpretation for this, because this is essentially the same slogan as Scotland, which is evident because Bannock is based on Scotland. So if you have a better way to word that, please let me know in the comments. I would appreciate it. So Bannock is uh, a considerably large island country for Mayfield, which is uh, the vast majority of nations in Mayfield are all in the same landmass, but Bannock and Batilia, who's very similar to Bannock, exist as separate islands in the southeastern part of the region. And like I said with Batilia and mentioning them just now, they were both once colonies of the Malignant Empire, much like Nigeria, who we discussed earlier as well. And Bannock exhibits a more peaceful disposition, as comes with the territory being associated with Mayfield, but hosts many foreign bases, good for training soldiers and allies of the Big Five in certain and inhospitable weather conditions. And you might be wondering, besides being just friendly and uh, besides being friendly to the Big Five, what else do they do? Bayonne actually has a considerably uh, powerful and interesting arms industry. That Bayonne actually manufactures and innovates a lot of arms, which then are sold to mainly Big Five client nations. Next, we have Shaukun's. Shaukun's motto translates to the sea, freedom, and Shaukun's is a large nation in north central Talmere, whose capital is Puglandia, and is a democratic republic led by President Brandosaurus Maximus. The president, Brandosaurus Maximus, was actually formerly a line cook, and this, I think, exemplifies the unorthodox but hardworking spirit of the average Chaukunzian, who are voter conscious to trust the common man over career politicians. And I think further proof of this is the fact that his ratings have been just going considerably higher as time has gone on with his term. So there you go. Chaukun's borders both Nigeria and the Polish Empire, and so as fate would have it, was also part of the Polish Empire. They would get their independence following World War One. But first, let me discuss the fact that World War One, at least in Talmere, began in Chaukun's when the crown prince of the Polish Empire was shot and killed by a Brokelian nationalist in the city of Puglandia. And with World War One, and at the crux of their revolution within that war, the liberation of Puglandia was in fact one of the deadliest conflicts during the war. Shaukun's and the citizenry of Shaukun's have a keen interest in cybersecurity, which, if you've seen the survey video, which included Shaukun's being surveyed, is actually the largest field of study in the nation. Many Shaukunzians around the world operate in InfoSec corporations, and in fact, even foreign governments, due to their knowledge of cyber warfare and being more familiar with the territory. Shaukun's is also a proud ally of Cantus, who in fact protested when they left the Big Five alliance, but continue to maintain good relations with everyone involved nonetheless. So that is Shaukun's for you. Moving on, we have Sijanuvia, whose motto translates to the Holy Field. So Sijanuvia has always been an interesting country, a historic battlefield between Danzig Imperials from the west and the Bassarids from the east. Geography. When we talk more about these empires that have influenced Scorian history, namely in Illustrious, these are both two large, formidable powers that briefly coexisted at the same time. But Danzhou and its dynasties were more prevalent in ancient history, whereas the Bassarids came later. Ondor Sahad, which is the large island in the north, has less population than the metro area of Toulon, which is the capital city. However, Ondor Sahad is actually home to large oil reserves, which is where the Sijanuvian nation gets most of its wealth. And the role of Sijanuvia in the proximity and alliance of the Big Five In addition to their shared democratic and liberal values, especially for a Lahana country, Sijanuvia is one of the more liberal Lahana countries in the world. They maintain pressure on anti-Big Five allies in Central Illustrious, as well as being a key player in the Katawi War, which is ongoing as we speak. At some point, we will very soon talk about the Katawi War, also known as Slave Raiders, for those of you more familiar with the Skorian lore. So that's Sijanuvia. Moving on, we have Islo, whose motto, as you can see in Lincoln, stronger together, divided we fall. Islo is actually, from a brief measurement recently, was found out to be the largest country by landmass in the world, located in southwestern Kasavea. In fact, is considered or nicknamed the kingpin of Kasavea, given its size, population, and sway over regional affairs. The nation is led by Grand Chieftain Great Condor, who was born Jonathan Renodekan, but is also led in the government by Prime Minister Red Squirrel, also known as Ilanaya Migorna. In fact, Islo has the largest legislature in the world, consisting of over 700 elected officials. And so, what is Islo, you might be wondering? It's a grand union or confederacy of several native tribes who are united in the face of uncertainty against foes both foreign and domestic, and in fact continued to remain unified as time went on and formalized itself into statehood sometime in the 190s with further constitutional amendments 200 years later. In fact, later Islo would form the Casavean Association of Nations from the suggestion of a Canadian diplomat, and the CAN, as it's now known, was used much like the Talmar Union to integrate the region and formalize and make interregional affairs more accessible and give nations in the region better say over how they wish to govern and act among themselves. And Islo also has the largest navy in Kasavea, and in fact is projected to be the next naval power in Scoria. This is also where it assists the Big Five, who don't have as big a reach in Kasavea as Islo does. In fact, namely, effectively capturing evading criminals, namely drug smugglers, which is a huge problem in nations, especially to the north of Islo. So it's safe to say Islo has a lockdown on things that go on within the region, as well as among, non-state opponents of the Big Five in Islo. So that's Islo for you. Next, we have Hjordland. Hjordland's motto translates to "for Theos and his kingdom." It's not about us. Very humble and religious population, as you can see. Hjordland is a constitutional monarchy who is the head of state is not listed here, but is Regent Lord Marcin Ivanov, who has been the Regent Lord of Hjordland for quite some time. So for that reason, I wanted to include the head of government, who is Prime Minister Henrik Högström. Hjordland is one of the largest nations in Talmar by land area, and it's in the far north, in fact, the far northwest of Talmar. And using its geographic position, it exerts pressure from the Big Five and the Talmar Union onto the bordering states such as Danasa, Ivarkea, and Chevenach. In fact, back in ancient times, Hjordland was the epicenter and stronghold of the Alsmir, who were a collection of cultures that sprang from this geographic area and then stretched into the far corners of the world. So we already kind of briefly discussed their role within the alliance of the Big Five. As far as other more recent history, there were several large battles of World War II that took place, especially in the southern parts of Hjordland, when the Danasans, the Danasan Union, as it was known, invaded Hjordland and in fact set up a rump state of extremists to further incite insurgency and chaos in Hjordland. But luckily this didn't last as long, and as you can see, Hjordland's back in one piece, ever vigilant and free and peaceful as ever. Moving on, Kardvemia. Kardvemia is located in south eastern continental Vasuna, and whose motto, despite being very intimidating and long to say, translates to "Great sacrifices were made to preserve our nation." In fact, I don't think any motto for a nation could be truer than that. Cardremi is a constitutional monarchy led by King Larash II, and also representing the government by Prime Minister Rachel Voku. Cardremians practice megalostraticanism. Jericanism is a large faith in Continental Vasuna, one of two large faiths in Continental Vasuna, and this branch of this faith was part of the reason for their secession and I guess you could say identity crisis, which inspired them to revolt and make a name separate from the Jericani state as it was back then. So Pyrrhic warfare granted the Cardvemians their freedom and the power to formally end the Thousand Years' War, a religious war of disastrous proportion that raged across the region. And so we will talk more about the Thousand Years' War at some other point in the future, but it's important to touch on to see the context of who are the Cardvemians and where they come from. But their role within the Big Five and their alliance is to enforce mutual agreements from the Big Five into the Vasuna Cooperative, sort of the regional union, so to speak, and to put pressure on otherwise hostile states such as Ukraine and the Kyrgyz Federation. Next, we have Malinka. Malinka's motto, in plain Malinkan, "Glory to the Crown." Very proud royalist sentiment there, even to this day. And that's because Malinka was once home to the largest empire in the world. The Malinkan navy, especially in medieval times, was a formidable force to be reckoned with. In fact, if you went up the Malinkan navy, it was basically certain death, especially considering the large swath of territory that they controlled at their peak. Malinka is, like other nations in this list, a constitutional monarchy led by King Joseph III of the House Grenwald, and in the government, which is elected, is represented by Prime Minister Arthur Morrington. So as we said, Malinka was once home to the largest empire in Scoria, and their colonies and colonial efforts transpired in many of the countries, in fact, already listed. However, those days are long past, and now Malinka exists as a faithful and supportive ally of the Big Five. So a very interesting, but not surprising, shift in ideology, seeing as, in fact, Malinka was actually home to democratic institutions as it maintained its empire, seeing it as sort of a survival necessity. See, because if you had one king making authoritative decisions for millions and millions of people across the world, I don't think it would have ended well personally. So it was very necessary for Malinka to introduce autonomy and home rule in many of its, loyalist colonies. Malinka is also the spiritual head of Hranic Catholic Theosism, which after the island of Hrana was transformed or succumbed to Northern Orthodoxy and the resurgence of the Lankor faith, the Malinkan Empire took it upon itself to recrown itself as the spiritual head for that large branch of Theosism. And that is also Malinka in a nutshell for you. Boom. Moving on to Boca, we have Nidawai, whose motto translates to "the protectors of the word of God." Nidawai is a large, diverse nation that which exists in a region known as the Horn of the Boca. You can see like this tipped area up here is actually on the coast, and this forms the horn, which goes down into this part, which is also coastal, known as the Cape of Hex. Nidawai was the historic center of Talakunidi, which is a large empire ruled by god kings that came from this nation and spanned the Horn of the Boca into the Cape of Hex before the Faltez Sultanate was formed. In fact, when I say god kings there, it's sort of a word lost in translation, equating a similar idea as the pharaohs, which the pharaohs ruled over ancient Aranka, which isn't too far from Nidawai. And so this idea of immortal and deity monarchs came over with them. The leader of Nidawai is ruled. Oh my God. The leader of Nidawai is King Bekumbuso Tazdinawi, and whose prime minister is Hamdadegu Iyasu, and she leads the democratically elected assembly in Nidawai. Nidawai was formerly ruled by the Vedians, as we discussed with Vedanum, shortly until the end of the Second World War, as well as sorry, let me just recollect myself real quick. Gosh. So Nidawai was formerly ruled by the Vedians until shortly after the Second World War, where they got their independence with the formal dissolution of the Vedian Empire, which then gave rise to the constitutional monarchy, which then formed today. Nidawai is also the largest adherent of Shaktamanic Theosism, which is arguably the oldest branch of Theosism, which dates back even further before the what's the word? Before the schism, which divided Orthodoxy and Catholicism. In fact, an interesting fact about the Shaktamanic Church is a church in Didesa, which is one of the largest cities in Nidawai, is guarded by who are known as the Veiled Virgins. And this church houses the Barge of the Pact, which houses relics and ancient texts sacred to both the Lankoru and Theosis faiths. It's often said if you open this barge, it'll basically melt your face off. So that's a very unpleasant thing to happen, and they're very protective of their religious sites, which exist all over the nation. Nidawai fought tooth and nail against the Solgari and even Kalantricine forces to preserve its modern borders. So after the Vascorian Empire dissolved in Luboka, it was up to Nidawai to defend itself and its territories, core territories that constituted Nidawaian groups, important and protected under their sovereignty. In fact, it's often believed that their guerrilla warfare tactics were first observed by the Big Five, dating back to prior to the Lubokan War, and are still used to this day. So there's Nidawai. Boom. Moving on, we have Ramden. Ramden's motto translates to peace and serenity. A very simple, very sweet motto. Ramden is one of two Suvak majority nations. Suvak is a rather new religion which sprang out of Ramden, actually sprang out of Ramden. And it's because of this they were under the reign of Samandar before seceding in the 180s DE, forming the modern nation of Ramden before they were briefly occupied and colonized by the Vedian Empire. Sorry, I didn't mention the other Suvak majority nation. It's Shigari, which is the mainland of Astuna. And following Ramdan's independence, they supported the Princes of Peace, which was a faction during the Samundari Civil War. They were pro-democratic and separatist movements within Samundar, effectively balkanizing the island of Samundar and giving them the borders we see today. Ramdan's also an educational hub, and in fact houses the largest rate of tertiary education in Vistuna, as many Ramdeni students go on to become skilled white-collar workers, including doctors, surgeons, and professors. And in modern times, Ramden continues to use its influence and promises of the Big Five members to exert pressure on Batundara, who Batundara are the remains of the unified Samandari government and still house a lot of those hostile ideologies, and as well as Ramden wants to shift their influence into Visuna in resolving hostilities as peacefully as possible. Moving on, we have Royalisis. Royalisis' motto translates to doing the most to secure a better future. Royalisis is a constitutional monarchy led by King Vestillo Manza Montenegro, who in fact recently took over after the previous king of Royalisis abdicated not too long ago. The nation is also led in the government by Prime Minister Bartomeu Silaz, and Royalisis is a flourishing island nation, almost considered to be technocratic, given its promotion of innovation and entrepreneurship and science. Royalisis also exhibits the most scenic and wild natural vistas, coupled with sleek and neon glazed metropolitan areas. In addition to Catalanus, which is the national language, they speak Nigerian Herdlandic, and in fact have one of the largest Herdlandic expat populations ever. In fact, maybe the largest outside of Herdland. And you might be wondering, what is Catalanus? It was a language largely spoken in the southern coastal regions of Bahia prior to the discovery of Realisis, which thus encouraged further Catalanic immigration. And the role within the Big Five as an ally, so while Realisis is largely a neutral state, it's in their best interest, as with their motto, to secure a better future and a peaceful one at that. It's because of their proximity in the middle of the Merchant's Ocean, closer to Illustrious and Vasuna, but also in the middle, across from Talmere. They do a great job of securing international shipping lanes, and in fact, Realisis is often one such stop for vessels of any of the three regions who are crossing the Merchant's Ocean to stop in, and Realisis uses that to inspect their ships before moving out, making sure everything is a-okay. And last but certainly not least in this lineup of closer allies is the island nation of Savarak, whose motto translates to the motherland of men and gods. Savarak is a constitutional republic led by President Valerico Cantoni, and the head of government in Savarak is known as Alexander Vincenzo. Savarak has very historic ties to Vedenum and the Vascourian region, which also includes Teleria, who is not on this list, but we will talk about some point in the near future. And Savarak fell under the rule of the Fateh Sultanate, much like southern parts of Vedenum and Agalon did. Savarak's role as a major contributor to the Big Five alliance and this lineup of nations is actually a lot of power and narrow shipping lanes that exist between Vedenum and Wisdo, in fact, which put a lot of pressure on Wisdo and other vessels coming into Valscoria from this point to reach inner Valscoria. That's to say, to reach, say, northern Vedenum, Reina, and like southern Valmora and Guaku. In other words, if Wisdo were to attack Savarak, so to speak, it would be very, very bad news for Wisdo. So that's Savarak. And this last slide will just detail briefly, looking ahead, what's in the future for the Big Five as the timeline goes on, and how will they be transformed and evolve as an alliance. So we briefly discussed the Slave Raiders conflict. That's an ongoing conflict right now in southern Illustrious. Essentially, corporate militias are taking over natural resources in the northern part of Hakatao, and it's not okay with the Big Five. And what they're doing is, the reason it's called Slave Raiders is because of their use of indentured servitude, basically slaves, to carve out and gather these resources illegally. So it's a ragtag team of the Big Five, in addition to Sejanuvia, who we discussed, as well as some unlikely allies such as the state of Basir, in order to combat these corporate militias who are enslaving people. And then looking ahead from there, 10 or 20 years from the current year in the timeline, is the Hellenic War, which will then transform this alliance into the Big Seven. And that'll include 2 more members of the Big Five lineup, and then becoming the Big Seven. And then in the far distant future, this Big Seven alliance will then transform into the 16 Cooperative, which, as the number insinuates, will include 16 nations in addition to those 7 already present, as equal partners in footing with a say as to what goes on and what should transpire in the world. And so that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. If you'd like to see these live as part of our World Building Wednesdays, you could watch me at twitch.tv/Mazarym. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one. I was definitely tripping over shit there, but pretty happy with it at the end. I will just take a quick break, and then we will talk about the regions of Scoria. and what you will see is actually going to be different to what the video will come out to be. So that'll be exciting, I guess. I think. I hope. So yeah, let me just take a quick break. I'll be right back. Alrighty, we're back. Whew. So yeah, that was a brief overview of the Big Five, and now we are actually going to get into um, a new intro to Scoria, which I have found and uncovered, and will narrate for your listening pleasure, as well as hopefully provide a it might be a little bit more vague of an explanation, but hopefully provide more insight and clarity into these regions, what they're based on, who's in them, uh, and the creative influences behind them as well. And then we'll get into this really cool questionnaire I found, which I'll turn everything back on for. We'll do it live. It'll be fun. So there you go. Holy. Okay. Let's do this. So there's our world map. Just do that. I like that. Perfect. Okay. And then where is that stuff right there? Oh God. Hang on one second. Okay, it didn't show anything. We minimized. Okay, let me do this. That's better. Let me put an image behind there as well, just in case that might happen again. Or actually, can I do this? Hold on one second. So I have it listed as this. There we go. I think that's the actual application and not so if I do this, can you see that? No, you can't. Perfect. Okay. We did it right. Got it. Cool. Alright, so let's get into this. Hello and welcome to the Studio Scoria channel. My name is Mazarym, and today I'd like to give you a brief interview. Hello and welcome to the Studio Scoria channel. My name is Mazarym, and today I'd like to give you guys a brief overview of every region in Scoria. So starting out down here, okay, can't say that. So starting here in Bosmaria is always caught between the waves of time, never firm in one place or another. In ages past, the great colonizers and merchants swerved through Bosmaria's various shipping lanes, leaving behind a bit of themselves with every passing. The modern nation-states that formed and their demographics do well to reflect this. Atop the sinking reefs and scattered atolls, you can find reflections of native Labokan faith, descendants of Valdez and Mlinken rule, and the legacies of ambitious individuals. Rum and fire we come plenty here, so you'd be wise to stock up. Bosmaria is based on the Caribbean and became a melting pot of interregional cultures and vagrants from the world over. For that reason, Bosmaria could potentially be the most diverse region in Scoria. Unlike in other regions where ethnic tension can easily escalate into armed conflict, Tok Bosma, a creole unique to the region, binds everyone together like a mosaic. Notable nations from Bosmaria include Beja, Bycinia, and Rukizia. Moving on to Talmer. The brilliance of God. Hang on one second. Okay. All right. Moving on to Talmer. The brilliance of Talmer's peoples has yet to be outmatched. In antiquity, the Talmari were sailors, explorers, and imperialists, but in their enlightenment, cast aside the sickening dogma of warring kings and embraced democracy and nurtured ideologies into powerful republics. As the herald of freedom, Talmer also hosts the capital of the Skorian United Nations, a testament to the bloody wars fought and won in the name of democracy. Talmer is a region largely inspired by Europe and North America, culturally similar to Europe but geographically very North American. Northern Talmer is a harsh, rugged landscape giving way to bountiful plains in the south and tropics along the southernmost coast. Notable nations from Talmer include Nigeria, the Volus Federation, and the NASA. Ugh. Moving on to Mayfjall. In the desolate... Oh my god. I'm just... Today's a flubbing day. It's a flub day. Like, I'm cut out for this, I know, but like, it's hard. It's hard, it's not easy. Moving on to Mayfjall. In the desolate far north, the Isles of Mayfjall rest. The seldom few who choose to live here, in comparison to the billions far south, vie for a quieter life. Within the snow and tundra are some of Skoria's prosperous and most peaceful nations. You will never find a kinder nor more welcoming soul than in the Mayfjall. Mayfjall can best be described as a terrestrial region within the Arctic Circle, one big enough for several nations to form and people willing to live there. Despite the harsh environment, many Skorians speak of it as one of the safest places to live. Notable nations from Mayfjall include Batilia, Bayanocht, and Svari. Moving on to Visuna. Mysterious and often misunderstood at best, the Visunans both hold... Oh my god. Oh my god. Moving on to Visuna. Mysterious and often misunderstood at best, the Visunans hold both grudges and bonds from the dawn of time. Countless kingdoms have come and gone, each leaving an... Oh my god. Countless kingdoms have come and gone, each leaving an imprint, evidence of their imperial... Oh my Jesus. Sean fucking Nathan. Okay. Ugh. Moving on to Visuna. Mysterious and often misunderstood at best, the Visunans hold both grudges and bonds from the dawn of time. Countless kingdoms have come and gone, each living with an imprint, evidence of their appearances to the varied cultures of this region. While some have found peace with their neighbors, others have been locked into eternal conflict at the behest of pantheons of old. In Visuna, you are best to mind yourself, because it seems as if every solution has been tried, but much like a Visunan, you do not lose hope in the gravest of times. Visuna is by far the largest region in Skoria by land area and number of nations. Much of its sovereign states are amalgamations of ancient and nomadic cultures who were locked into a great religious struggle known as the Thousand Years' War. The drastic effects of tribalism left much of the Visunan interior decades, and sometimes even centuries, behind the world, and they can still be felt today. Notable nations from Visuna include Shagari, Ramden, and Kardvemia. Moving on to Illustrious. Illustrious? Okay. Oh my god. Often left to their own devices, the Illustrians formed... I can't do it. I can't do it. I thought this would be easy, but oh my god, I'm just struggling. Today's a struggle, everybody. Today's just a fucking struggle. Pardon my Nigeria. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty proud of that joke. Often left to their own devices, the Illustrians forged their nations in relative secrecy. Though merchants often floated about, the native kingdoms were often wary of outsiders and their influences. This was in part due to the wrath of Visunan warlords, which in ancient times rained down hellfire on formerly wealthy civilizations. The Illustrians exhibit a tranquil disposition and view the world through a realist lens, and while many of them broke the unspoken oath of silence, what rewarded those that kept the word? Stability, independence, and more importantly, peace. Culturally and Culturally inspired by East and Southeast Asia, Illustrious has always isn't there, guys. Illustrious has been historically more isolated than Visuna, with many nations never venturing from the confines of their teal waters. The three kingdoms in antiquity began this trend, preferring to divide and conquer the region among themselves, rather than let foreigners run amok and spoil their prized kingdoms. Notable nations from Illustrious include Danzao, Silamong, and Royalisis. Moving on to Matafua. Cast far from known civilization, the isolated cultures of the southern hemisphere are a testament to time and resilience. Matafuans are proud of their lineage, perhaps the most ancient, unchanged people groups in Scoria. In the millennia past did their ancestors make the great voyage, when the world was young, taking advantage of the lowered sea levels and following the stars. What led them to this place may never truly be known, but rather what has kept them: beautiful land, bountiful harvests, and bewildering monuments. Matafua is in fact the newest addition to Scoria, inspired by Oceania, a region, while not free of the imperialistic influence and ambition of other nations, still flourishing in its rich native faiths and tradition. Notable nations from Matafua include Ahiwai, Nimu, nope, that's not Nimu, Nimu, and Seashantian. Laboka. Victims of colonization attempts and exploitation, the Labokans are sadly no stranger to foreign influence. Even in their earliest years, kings and chieftains from the north and south have been trying to conquer one another. The spread of Lahara and Theosism respectively did much to increase this tension, where once peaceful tribes would fight over one another for the supremacy of their respective faith. However, Laboka, with the aid of its former colonizers, is progressing physically and psychologically into modern times, and it might even just surpass the modern world with her people's ambition, dedication, and patience. And patience. I'm gonna record. Oh my god. Laboka suffered greatly at the expense of imperial powers, including those of her own soil. In their efforts to move beyond their historic transgressions, a great deal of natural wealth and beauty has become the forefront of their interregional importance, with much of Laboka comprising manufacturing or trading hubs, both of which bring home the credits. Notable nations from Laboka include Nidawai, Yadinya, and Kadal. Valscoria. Some would be quick to call the Valscorians careless brutes, but others see them as the protectors of peace. The islands of Valscoria lie at the epicenter of the world, a volatile region of proud, sometimes zealous peoples. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and storms were constant within the raging seas to complement their warlike upbringing. On the eve of modernity, reformations have changed the way most feel about their nature and role in the world. Since then, Valscoria has become a center for innovation, medicines, aerospace, information technology, and even weaponry. A land inspired by the Mediterranean, clinging onto the ancient ways of war, Valscoria is the oldest region in Scoria, perhaps indicative of the name. The nations that reside here are often regarded as the powder kegs next to a furnace, just eager for the next excuse to go to war. Recent times have done much to change this, with a regional council and more onlookers to hold the right people accountable. Notable nations from Valscoria include Valmora, Giwaku, and Veredum. And last but certainly not least, let's talk about Casavea. Casavea's history is one of both compromise and strife, where exiles and explorers often met with natives, friendly and hostile. Her past is littered in war amongst her own peoples, both foreign and native. In a world where all seemingly equal, but in a time where differences were demonized, she still bears the scars of these conflicts today. But for those who saw the light of truth and justice, Casavea remains a diverse and colorful land where people can live without fear of discrimination and judgment. The vision of Casavea is a land based on indigenous America, scorned by colonialism, yet undeterred by it. The states here reside within conventions unique to them and to them alone, bringing about both confusion and envy from the rest of the world who were forced to the states here. Oh my god. This is, guys, help. The states here reside within conventions unique to them and them alone, bringing about both confusion and envy from the rest of the world, who were forced to conform to the powers that be. Notable nations from Castlevania include Islo, Felranza, and Illicar. This is actually the last region down here. Cadwaria. Untamed and untouched by man, the discovery of Cadwaria was deadly and arduous. Second to the Daltonian expedition, the Osmer expeditions were trials that tested the greatest limits of humanity. After much stress, failure, even death, ambition triumphed in the end. Cadwaria contains no sovereign states as ordained by the Scoria United Nations. Instead, it is home to several research facilities, the largest of which being an Orcon Island. Cadwaria rests at the South Pole, a landmass blanketed by thick ice, with only a handful of research stations. There are only 2 permanent settlements in Cadwaria, Orcon Island, the largest research station operated by the United Nations, and the Islands of Skybridges, a vestige of the Cantanian Empire. Well, that's all I have for you right now. I hope you enjoyed this look into our world of Scoria. If you'd like to learn more about Scoria, consider subscribing to see more videos in the near future. If you'd like to see these recordings done live, you can watch me on Twitch at twitch.tv. Oh my god. If you'd like to see these recordings done live, you can watch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Mazarym. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. That was too long of a pause to use. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. that was hard. Rest assured, I will be spending quite some time in the near future to trim that down and edit it. God. Oh. Wow. Sorry, I can't get over like how rough that was. That was like the worst one. But hopefully through the power of editing, that will become out much better than it looks. So stick around for that. Lastly, let me do this. Lastly, this is the first time, and hopefully not the last time we'll do this, but some live action doc editing in real time. How about that? What I have here, as I mentioned in the beginning of the broadcast, from sfwa.org, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America website, from Patricia C. Red in 1996, the Fantasy World Building Questions, People, and Customs. If you'd like to try this yourself, if you like what we do here, or you have a nation of your own or world, I highly recommend this because from a brief glimpse, this is like a very in-depth and really cool questionnaire. In fact, I grabbed this from the r/worldbuilding master list of resources, which is a Google Doc which has a lot of cool world building resources on it. So I'm going to make a new doc, and we're going to attempt to answer some of these questions. In fact, let me do this. Valmora, people, and customs. Excuse me, questionnaire. I hope I spelled that right. But basically, I want to run through my country, Valmora, and see how well or how in depth I can answer some of these questions. Because there's a lot. I don't know if I want to do all of them, but I'll definitely try to do a lot of them. And we'll put them here in this doc that I'm making right now. Just copy this, paste this. Okay, can I not do that? Really? That's so weird. Oh, because I'm okay. That's why. Because I'm signed in my other account. That's why I can't do it from there. That's fine. That's okay. All right. So let's do this. Where is my browser thing? I guess. Oh, you know what? Because I changed all my sources and stuff, I gotta remake it, which is fine. New browser. Wait, it's right here. Is it not? Yeah, it is. I don't know why it wasn't showing up. That's weird. Nope, don't do that. Everything's coming back on. We're gonna do this live. So there you go. Hope that's not too blinding for your eyes. If it is, I apologize. If you want, maybe I could like go back to my camera and do this. I don't know. Excuse me. All right. So let's run through this. Oh man, these are really good questions. I don't know what I want to start with. So let's go with yeah, you know what? You know what? The best way to do this would be to show the questions on stream as I'm answering them as well. Yeah, you know what, Nick? I will start from the beginning. So here's the website as I linked. Starting with general questions. Do people believe the old tales, or do they just? Oh my God! Do they dismiss some that have a basis in fact? Examples: Troy. So let's copy this question over, right? Control V. And so when I think of Almora, do people still believe in the old tales? Or do they dismiss some that have a basis in fact? Let me think about that for a second. So when I think old tales in Valmora, we'll probably do a World Building Wednesday. When I talk about the Valmoran timeline, I think more of the ancient history of the nation. Many of it is aloof in myth. So you know what? I'm gonna say yes. I would say the average Valmoran, namely, especially from say rural communities, to believe in the legends and tales of old, provided they have some degree of truth to them. So in this context, I'm saying, for example, during the War of the Ancient Savam in Valmora, it's often believed that one of the main leaders in this alliance of city-states that took over the city of Vorduim personally went through and led the charge into the city and decapitated the king of Vorduin's head. Was this true? No. But were both these people there? Yes. So, in fact, let me include that. Two examples, actually. Two examples. See, yeah, I agree, Nick. I think this is a great tool for us to fill out. That's why I'm going to link it. I'll link it in Discord right now so you can check it out. I know it's on Twitch. Let me do this. Just so we protect the archives. I'll put this in resources. This is a really good and in-depth question there. Two examples of this would be it is often believed that this figure's name is Shados. So in Valmoran, if you see an S and a Z, it's pronounced like a J. So Shados, the chieftain of the Dovari clans during the Savamite War, personally led the charge into the Battle of Vorduin and decapitated King Scorius' head. This is is. How do I want to word this? This is not true in the sense. No, that's a bad way to word it. Both of these figures existed and were present during this conflict or battle, but there is no tangible evidence that this encounter ever actually occurred. Another example, you guys might like this one, and in fact this will actually tell you where I get my username from. Mazarym, as it turns out, is actually a Valmoran historical figure. In fact, is the patron saint of Valmora, and that is where my name Mazarym is come from. Boom. So it's often also believed it. Oh my God, what am I typing? Another example would be the death of Saint Mazarym. Mazar Abakal was a foot soldier in the Valmercian army during the Arcandres Wars. Arcandros is a small island nation off the coast of where Valmercia is, which is southeastern Valmora. During the nearing the end of the Arcandres blockade of Vorduin, a distraught and brave Mazar, set off on a vessel loaded, and I mean to the brim, loaded with explosive material straight for the blockade. As a result of this endeavor, his vessel was ignited and destroyed. The majority of the blockade. It is often believed, as it would turn out, that his arm extending a sword from the waters was visible, symbolizing his triumph and sacrifice against the foe. As popular as this tale or symbol remains, especially with the Vordusians, I guess. As popular as this depiction of him remains, so to speak, the arm coming out with the sword, this more than likely didn't happen. He probably died instantly, unfortunately for them. But there you go. Wow, I wasn't really expecting to answer that much for the first question, but there you go. That was that. Let's keep going, shall we? Do wild and rebellious people dress any differently from anybody else? Are they allowed to? You know, this would depend on the cultural norms specific to each region and the nation. I would say for the vast majority of people, especially in more liberal or metropolitan areas, they would face absolutely no backlash nor discrimination for dressing differently or rebellious. Um, and that sort of answers the question. They would be allowed to dress differently rebellious. Um, However, especially, oh my god, in more religious and conservative circles, even tight-knit circles like smaller communities, and I say religious and conservative in the sense not just theosists, but also there's a large Lahda community in Samarkand, which is in the center, the north center of the region. In fact, let me see. I feel bad explaining these without context, and I want to show you guys now a map of the regions of Almora so that this becomes clearer later on. In fact, what I'll do is, yeah, I'll put it actually in the stream so you guys can see, and it'll be like in the corner, the opposite corner, so it'll be easy to refer to. I just gotta find where it's stored. It is. There it is. I think. Yep, that's it. So let me do this. Image, add source. Call it map. Browsing. Then we go here. There it is. Boom. We just size that down a tad bit. Oh, but there's no names on that. I just realized. That's the flag map, which is very pretty, but probably won't help us out. There we go. That's kind of small though, I feel like too. So like if I do that, will that help? I don't know. Huh? 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 You know, here's what I'll do. When we have to refer to this, I'll pull it up, so it's here for later. In fact, I'll pull it up now because looking at the map, that large north central region, that's Samarkand, would be a very historically conservative region. Obasia would also be pretty conservative, and even parts of Almercia, where the capital is, I would say surrounding Vorduin. I think Vorduin's far more liberal than it once was. Where else? I think everywhere else would be like moderate. The more liberal areas of Almor would be like Mitas, which is that island chain in the south right here. Avensk, especially Suldranta and Dratomar would be very liberal. Tamarval and even Marisal would be pretty liberal as well. Everywhere else that we haven't mentioned, so Despia and Doa and Janyar would probably be more moderate, I would say. And this gray island right here, that's Arkandras. So when we're talking about the Arkandries Civil War, or excuse me, the Arkandries Wars, these guys were blockading Valmercia several centuries ago. So there you go. This dressing in rebellion would certainly be frowned upon. How do most people make a living in Valmora? Let's do this. We'll bold the questions so we can tell them apart. How do most people make a living in Valmora? That's a tough one. I never really thought too much in depth about the economy and the workforce of Valmora. I think we'll answer this with what I think most people outside of the country would think of them as. So when occupations come to mind, the average scoring, for that matter, would consider most Valmorans to be in some form of what's a good way to put this? Some form of laborious industry, the military, or even in medicine. Valmora exhibits a large, exhibits a great deal of attention to their healthcare system, which is a universal system and thus employs a lot of people, not just citizens, as doctors, nurses, assistants, etc. Let's just put etc. Like I guess I'm trying to conjure what you might find occupations wise in like a hospital. So not just the people tending to the people that are patients, but like like cooks, custodians, people that are higher up. You could say it's a bit like I think besides the military, maybe public healthcare is probably like one of, if not the most employed sector in Valmora. So I'll put that for that answer. And that, I believe, is the rest of that's the whole general category. Now we get into these, which I don't know if I want to do all of these because that's a lot. But, or maybe we can make, I don't know. You know what? We'll go in order, and I'll pick a few that I like and answer them. We'll start with this category, and I'll kind of mix and match around. I keep forgetting I can't do that. So, this question from Customs asks, what personal weapons are available to anyone who can afford them? Are some considered, quote, for nobles only, or either by custom or by law? Are there any laws forbidding certain classes from being armed at all? Historically, prior to the event known as the Purge of the Old Peers, only the upper classes were legally allowed to be armed. The peasant and serf classes of Valmora were forbidden and brutally punished for arming themselves, fearing it would incite rebellion. The Purge of the Old Peers was a very transformative and impactful civil conflict in Valmora. I believe it stems from the... I want to get this right. Hold on. Let me double check. I have my actual account open on this side, so I'll look up the Old Peers. So, shortly after, in fact, almost immediately after the unification of Valmora and the formation of the Valmoran Empire, the Purge of the Old Peers was, instigated by the ruling royal family to weed out traitors and weak links uh, that would be detrimental to the empire's growth and progress. So, for context, that more includes regional nobles and other figures who were otherwise unpopular with the new royal family. So, this was the centralization of imperial power, like I said, the culling of quasi-independent dukes and warlords, effectively stripping them of any real power. The Purge of the Old Peers also abolished serfdom with the passage of the Doctrine of Peace, um, and is marked as the beginning of Valmoran modernization and imperialism. In fact, this also stems from an older event in history called the Valmercian Revolt. So, soon after the Atzuri Demors took power, the Valmercians who ruled in and around Vorduem rebelled, and they failed. And so this purge of the old peers was basically a continuation or a finalization of that. It's like, hey, look, we're in charge now. You gotta go. And by you gotta go, you gotta die or get in line. So there you go. Following this purge, the serf class was abolished in name, and all people would be allowed to arm themselves. In spite of these legal technicalities, the old ways of the old nobility could not stop the average citizen from owning or bearing their own arms. The average, let's say, the average, what's a good word? You know, we'll do that word. We'll do both words. Patriarch, or in some cases, matriarch of a Valmoran family, often brandished this is in the context of ancient, not ancient, but more older times, a flintlock pistol and a saber or blade of some fashion. They would wear this in tandem with a cloth wrapping or belt around their waist. Similar, in fact, to let me show you. Similar to this. So as you can see here on the right side, the traditional dress of the country of Montenegro is actually one of the best and biggest inspirations to Valmora, as with the rest of the former Yugoslav states. But more specifically, this style of dress is what influenced me to centerize. That's not even a word. When I look at this, I think of the Justicars, who are like the royal guards of Valmora. And they were inspired off of the more colorful and flashy uniforms of the citizenry, especially in southeastern Valmora. So you can see this guy right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's there. He has this cloth belt or wrapping with a sword and a pistol. Sometimes you'll see variants where like they'll carry two pistols or two swords. It really depends. But overall, really cool depiction and image in my head when I think of the Valmorans. Here's another example of the postcard. This guy's got something. So they're always packing is the point. Packing heat. And that's that. However, in modern times, legislation has brought about resounding reform to the legality of owning specific weapons. Most firearms are forbidden, with barring very, very specific exemptions. Otherwise, most law allows for the purchasing non-lethal weaponry such as tasers, pepper spray, what else is non-lethal? I have this listed somewhere. Let's clarify this real quick. Let's rephrase this. Semi-automatic firearms, such as pistoles, for example. As well as tasers, pepper spray, and other electroshock weaponry. Weapons. So I hope that answered that question. I think it answers it pretty well. All right. This is really interesting because like I've never even had a second thought about like birth and death, honestly. This is a good question. I think we can answer. What are the rites of passage in this culture? Are they formalized rituals, such as being dubbed at night, or are they informal? Are they different for men and women, for nobility and peasants? Man, gosh. Oh, man. This often varies depending on where one grew up. However, the cultures in Valmercia, Tamorval, and the Marisol have a common tradition which involves an arduous hike. This was more common a rite of passage for both nobility and peasantry alike. That's not how you spell peasantry, but has lost its practice with the advent of modernization. this, excuse me, one must simply climb to the top of a noteworthy or local mountain, as this part of the country, as it would have it, was very mountainous. In the case of Tamorval, Ian's attempting this ritual, one was to climb. I should also clarify. This was a common tradition for men and women, regardless of class. Attempt this. In the case of Tamorvalians, southeast, right there, boom, boom. Attempting this ritual, one was to climb to the peak of Mount. We need a name for this mountain. Help me out. Let's get a good name for this mountain. Mount Gorchani. And leave a Valmercian ducat, which was the old currency before credits, on the ledge of the mausoleum of Dolovar nad Sherda. If we ever get to a point when we talk about the 100 Years' War between Cantus and Valmercia, Dolovar was the regent lord of Valmercia for, I want to say, near the end of the war, and he was a very influential figure, very proud warrior, and very, very near and dear to the hearts of the Tamorvali Valmorans, who, in fact, he actually was born in Tamorval, and he's depicted on the flag as well. So they took his remains to Mount Gorchani, where he's buried, and you have to leave a coin for him. Because people like Dolovar, and people want good luck, and there you go. So I think that's a good answer, but it's also only one example. So, I got a good one. Another example would be a ritual for men in the Isles of Drantomar on the western shores of Valmora. Open the map again. Drantomar right here. You can't see my cursor because it's underneath, but you can kind of see where Drantomar is referring to, hopefully. Provided one was strong enough, or even for that matter, brave enough. This rite of passage involved a man fishing for a baby mola. Now, for the Valmorans and for Scorians, this mola fish, you might also know it as a sunfish. So they had to hunt one of these, a juvenile one. So the juvenile sunfish or molas are actually quite large, even for not being fully grown. They're not this small, but somewhere in between that and this 5,000-pound behemoth. So we'll put juvenile or young. We'll put young mola fish. This, as you can imagine, given the sheer size of a mola fish, was very, very dangerous. And oftentimes, fishermen would mistake mature mola fish for young ones, leading them to their inevitable doom beneath the waves. The reason they hunt mola fish is apparently it's quite tasty, and it's also very big, so it feeds a lot of people. And so that's another example of a rite of passage. Probably not one that's practiced too much, considering how deadly it is. Let's find another question. Who is normally present for births? This is a very simple question. I keep forgetting I can't do that. I'm so used to doing that. Is it strictly a matter for women, or are men involved, or is only the women present as the expectant mother? Or is the only woman present the expectant mother? The expectant father must or is always assumed present to assist his... How far along am I in the questionnaire? So I finished all three of the general, and now I'm just kind of jumping through customs. I think I've answered two of the custom custom questions already. This is the third one I'm doing right now. The expectant father must or is always assumed to be present to assist his we'll use vague language here. We'll just say second half. In regards to the pregnancy, in many cases, especially among the northern Valmoran cultures, so Andoa, Despia, some are called Janyard, even parts of Soldranta and Drantamar. It was often the case that the entire family on both sides of the marriage, or assuming they're married, often the case they're married at this point in history, would be there to help and ease the suffering of pregnancy. In some instances, the aunts of the expectant mother would attempt to apply, or I shouldn't say apply, to conjure herbal treatments to ease the pain of the pregnancy, while the men on both sides of the family were expected to provide food and entertainment in the form of singing or storytelling. It's a very proud and historic storytelling culture In Valmora, in fact, oftentimes involves music. Uh, One of the most popular instruments is the gusle, uh, and that's often used to recite and resound historic events in the nation. This is obviously from the mindset of a more traditionalist um, scenario. In modern times, in fact, let's make a note of that. In modern times, these conventions are rare, but the traditional virtues of the husband being, the father being present at their um, at the birth of their child remain. This would often take place in a hospital, much like you would find in any other part of the world. Boom. Uh, I think we'll skip over customs for now. We did a couple of those. Um, Eating. Ooh, wow. Oh, I love this. This is gonna be a good question. I keep doing that. I just realized, Nick, if you're still watching this or present, if you want to join me on Discord, let me know. I see you're online. So, let's move on to this eating question. What dishes are considered holiday food? What food or drink are associated with particular holidays and events? In fact, I just so happen to have a section of my lore talking about food, and I would be more than happy to expound upon that. So let me actually do this real quick. Hold on. I'm gonna go here. Okay. So let's talk food. Let's talk holidays. Um, I gotta look at holidays too. On King's Day and actually let's put this the most common holiday foods, in fact the most universal holiday foods would be considered shoduji, as well as let's see scampa, where is show me Zarma and Jebab. These foods would be often found at almost every holiday in Valmora. And I'm sure you're probably wondering, what the hell does any of that mean? I will show you right now. Shoduji is just the Valmora name for calamari. Calamari shoduji is actually the national dish of Valmora, one of two national dishes. Very simply put, fried squid rings, often served with marinara or lemon wedges. Obviously with regional variants as time goes on. The national sandwich of the country, as it might have it, is called the gostava, which is simply a calamari sandwich, or fried squid wings. Goodness gracious, squid rings on a baguette. Maybe you saw there's some cheese or some kind of butter on there. I don't know. You do you. Either way, it looks delicious. Scampi is shrimp scampi. So you ever had shrimp scampi before? That's what it looks like. Very delicious. And what else? Ooh, sarma is stuffed peppers. Excuse me. It's a name for stuffed peppers, but the dish more commonly is grape leaves that are stuffed with mincemeat. Uh, there might be a different name for the stuffed pepper variant. I'm not positive, but there you go. And then jevap is chevapi, which depending on where you live in the Balkans might change the name or the pronunciation of it. It looks like this. It's some kind of like it's kind of like a sandwich. It looks really good. These are like often like beef or lamb or pork, and this is like ivar, which is like a peppery sauce with onions, and it's a ground meat dish, basically like grilled Serbian sausages. So there you go. But it's also from Bosnia and even Albania and other parts of the Balkans. So yeah, those are the most universal holiday foods in Valmora. Specific examples would include, oh my god, I forgot to mention, all downed with a nice glass of rakia, which depending on the region will exhibit several varieties in flavor and general consistency. So if you're familiar with Balkan culture, you'll know rakia. Distilled drink, and is virtually made with, I believe, almost anything. So this is, I believe, yes, this is Bulgarian apple rakia. I just saw, I see, I don't even know what that is. That's the kind of fruit. Pears, you can see peaches, grapes, apricots, figs. I've even seen instances of lemon or honey rakia. Yeah, that's the national drink of Valmora as well. And many regions will have different varieties of rakia. So there you go. Specific examples would include, let's see here, serving shunka visoda on King's Day, or supa riba trice on Marnus Day. So if you watched or seen the stream or the edited version of the calendar video, Marnus Day is a spring folk festival which Valmora does celebrate. So Supa Ribatrice is a fisherman's soup. Looks like this. It will depend on where you live in Valmora on the fish that's inside, but it generally looks like this. So that's Supa Ribatrice. Shunka Vizoda translates to the what's it called? It translates to the king's ham. And what is the king's ham? It's gabagoo. Hey, where's the frickin' gabagoo, eh? So yeah, the king's ham. It's gotta be that delicious to serve on King's Day. For weddings or funerals, oh, I don't know. That would really depend, I think. Let's see. There isn't really like a specifically wedding or funeral food. It really just depends on what the bride and groom are in the mood for, really, I would say. There's nothing super traditional about wedding food in Valmora, other than it would probably include this lineup here. So, yeah, that's food. Let's see. Uh, Wow, I didn't really think too much about these. That's kind of funny to think about. But we don't have any other races in Scoria. Hello? What's up? How's it going? You doing alright? You want to talk about it or no? Alrighty. What shift are you right now? No, I feel you. I'm not actually in school right now, but I totally get it. I've been there, I believe me. Oh yeah, you got it. You got it. Oh, what do you think? Thank you. Yeah, that was I had watched the what's it called? Um, the movie recently, and I was watching a bunch of clips. So I put like 800 Beavis and Butthead clips. In there. I mean, gotta love Eric Andre. Let's be real. So, the what if it was purple? The rabbit. Oh God, man, what the hell's wrong with you? Look at that shit, man. Just put the North Korea. I'll just move. He's like so defeated. I don't know how true it was, but apparently that segment was like an hour or something. But they cut it down, so they just kept the wheels spinning. I don't know if it was that long, but it was. It felt like it was long. So, oh my god, the Chussie. It's too much. Daft Punk is dead, but we still have Craft Punk. There you go. Man, these are some good questions that I never really thought about. Are there classes of people or beings who are never introduced to other classes? No, no. Oh, this is a very easy question. Keep forgetting to do that. It's a good, you know, I'll do both of them. Oh, absolutely, you're right. So this first question: are there customs involving the way in which someone is named when being introduced? And the parentheses is like an example of ability, which is often the case for an ability. Yes, there are, in fact. No, let's rephrase that. Ability in Mora. Yeah. You know what? Keep this. Under formal circumstances, nobility and Valmora are often introduced in tandem with the titles they inherit. For example, when the Soda and or his family are introduced at an event. One of his aides, often a Justicar, will read out the list of titles the royal family claims. This includes disputed titles, which are found exerting, what's the word? Not rule, but like, or maybe rule over. Exerting, let's put influence over regions of Danasa and Savarak. And this is because the current royal family, the House of Atsur-Damor, made up of two previously separated royal families, were from those countries. The House of Damor is actually an ancient Valmoran family from the west coast that went and invaded Talmer into what is now Danasa. Parts of it came back and ruled over Sonoma. And then the House of Atsuri is actually a Vascorian house from Savarak that fled following the Fatez Sultanate's invasion of Savarak. Ugh. The two were unified, forming this royal family. With regards to international events or meetings, when the Vizoda is introduced, these titles are not read or stated. Rather, he is referred to as Vizoda Jacko or just Jacko Atsuri-Damor. What else can I add to this? A more archaic introduction for the Prime Minister of Valmora was often the voice of the people, or even the voice of the Emperor, seeing as traditionally, while the Prime Minister was elected from the majority vote in their, or from their party, it was the Emperor that formally appointed the leader of that party to the position of Prime Minister. That's how they do that, right? Like in most constitutional monarchies. So, like, for example, like if let's say like the Tories win an election, whoever leads the Tories is the PM, but the Queen like formally appoints them, right? Okay, gotcha. That's what I was trying to make a note of here. Okay, so boom. And now, is there a difference in with the way you greet someone you already know compared to greeting a stranger? How does someone acknowledge an acquaintance at a distance, passing on the side of a street? Okay. For close family or partners, kisses and hugs are often exchanged. For a close friend or even acquaintance, what's known as the double tap is common. kissing each other cheek. For a complete stranger meeting for the first time, the greeting would be initiated with a nice handshake. Do a separate paragraph for this. Especially popular among servicemen or those in the government. The Valmoran salute is exchanged. This is simply forming a fist with your right hand and placing it over your chest where one's heart is located. I guess that's horizontally, not vertically. So kind of like, you can't really see it well. Kind of like this. In fact, I think I have a dude in Hero Forge who's doing that. I can show you what I mean. Oh, but I'm not logged in. You know what? Let me, I probably have it downloaded somewhere. His name is, yeah, Todar Toshev. Yeah, so this man depicted here, you can't see him because he's not on the browser. Never mind. I'll do this. Images. Add source. New one. Call him TT. Where is he? There he is. So this guy right here. You can see how he's holding his fist like that. That's the Valmoran salute. The reason he's all dressed to the nines, the purple and the sword and stuff, he's the captain of the Justicars, and so they dress very formally. So that's your Valmoran salute. That's very popular among the government and servicemen. As far as passerbys at a distance or otherwise, how would they greet each other? That's a great question. You know what? A simple wave or a yell makes do. When meeting someone, we kind of already covered the gesture. Our gestures and body language. You know, let's do this. Gosh. Are gestures and body language in the society generally subtle or not? Do people talk with their hands or is it considered vulgar? Valmorans, and in fact, for many Valscorian cultures, they do tend to talk and gesture with their hands. Body language is very important in the Valmoran culture, and only more recently in international hubs like Gordon, Avinska Bay, Ilopan has it fallen out of style to conform to more broader and easier to understand conformities. Your average city dweller won't be talking with his hands, but many Valmorans will be doing that. They do be doing that. I got Gabagool in my tabs right now. Get out of here. Ooh, wow, that's a good question. we sort of covered the respecting with the saluting. Um, I can't really answer this question because I haven't thought of any like insulting gestures. But okay, visits. Hmm, really? Did you ever look at the world building master list doc from the subreddit? Okay, that's where I got this from. Um, there may have been other lists similar to it, but in fact, I may have opened this once, but I never actually answered it. But that might have been a while ago, I think. Um, how do different cultures and races interact in conflict? Let's try to answer this one. Are there questions that must be asked or avoided? Are there topics that can be raised only by the host or the guest? Um, the case of the very, let's put tribalistic, Marasali cultures. So we open the map. We are referring to this region, the Marasal, in the red text. It is often considered rude, in fact, heinous to question or dispute the the legitimacy of their family, of one's lineage. This has often sparked wars among these families, including, quote, territorial disputes, as well as blood feuds, which can go on for centuries. In fact, blood feuds are a real thing that occur in Montenegro and Albania, and even I think parts of Kosovo and Serbia. Essentially, this involves a conflict between two families, usually at the onset of one person being murdered by another family, and it's like, okay, you did this, I have to murder someone from your family. And then they go, oh, okay, well, you murdered that guy, I gotta murder this guy. And it just goes back and forth. It's very, very sad and tragic. And oftentimes, children will get caught in the middle of it. And I don't think it's very common anymore, but this was like, we're talking more like Ottoman period, and even after that. In fact, I think there might be a documentary on YouTube that talks about it as well in more detail. And that's actually where I got the inspiration for that violent part of the country. So, yeah, exactly. Jeez, precisely. So that's one example from one culture. Oh, here's a good one. If by chance you're invited into a home in Samarkand, right here in the orange, you would do well to avoid mentioning the Lahada conquest of Samarkand. Despite having been a very old conflict, it's still very sore in the minds of both Qasim and Theosist Samarkand alike. Qasim is also the word we use to refer to adherents of Lahada. That's a newer term simply because Lahadars just doesn't flow as well. So this is in part due to simply generation after the next regaling the often tragic and arguably falsified history of events that occurred during the war. So the fact is, Lahada Qasim forces invaded central Samarkand because they were pushed in by the kingdom of Despia. Despia were the first area of Almora that was invaded, and instead of leaving Despia, they got pushed inward and stayed there. And depending on who you ask, in Samarkand, historians often will disagree on what happened and what went down precisely. A lot of them will claim several atrocities were committed by the Qasims or several atrocities committed by the Theosists who were fleeing in the wake of the Qasims coming in. It's all very cloudy even to this day. So don't mention that war. It's bad. Is there another thing you shouldn't mention? Oh no. Lastly, as far as conflicts go, for the love of Veer and all that is good, do not under any circumstance talk about the civil war in any case unless the host brings it up. That was about 30 or 20 years ago from the current timeline, still very fresh into the minds of Valmorans, even the ones that weren't even alive at that time. Do not talk about the Civil War unless somebody else brings it up first, the host specifically. I saw this looking through these. This is a very easy and fun question to answer. Is there a trade language that facilitates commerce between countries that don't speak the same tongue? Is there a universal language, such as Latin in the Middle Ages? This is true for pre-unified Valmora and even Valscoria, as well as the rest of the world. Malinken. Malinken is the universal, aka lingua franca, of not only Valmora, but the world. As we discussed, the Malinken Empire being an expansive world power for a time. Even the countries they didn't rule or have territory in, they definitely exerted influence there. Valmora was one of these cases that adopted Malinken because of their close allying with the Malinkans, and while they didn't set up colonies at all in Valmora, they did set up communities that still exist today. They're called the Malinskis. That, in fact, if they don't speak Valmoran at all, they speak only Malinken, or they learn both languages but learn Malinken first. So yeah, Malinken is the universal language of not only Valmora but the world. It was brought to Valmora by Malinken merchants seeking entry into Valscoria through the western coast of Mora, as oftentimes they were sent back by the Valmercians, which ruled the east, or worse, the Fatez Sultanate and its band of Kislevian pirates would turn them back as well. Long story short, the Lincolns made a considerable cultural impact on Valmora, and it remains one of the co-official languages of the nation to this day. Are some or all people bilingual? Good question. Kind of a follow-up to this one, so we'll answer it. Most Valmorans are in fact bilingual, speaking Valmoran and Malincan. Valmoran was constructed from two Duramic languages, Obicranian, spoken in the western part of the nation, and Valmercian, which was spoken in the east. The two were already very similar, but used different alphabets, and Valmercian had considerable Vascorian and even Guacian influence on its language. Most higher government officials may know up to 4, sometimes 5 languages. The most commonly learned languages will vary on profession, but the list generally includes Archidrese, Nicterian, Guacian, Vascorian, Valdish, or even Balak. Balak is spoken by the Adinians and people in Aranka. It's also the clerical language of Lahada, so very important for those studying Lahada scripture or going as diplomats to those countries to study Balak. See, Valmoran is a conlang, but it's not this well developed to be answering these questions. We kind of answered the question: how many languages are there? Are there different? So there's more for cultures. There's no wizards in Valmora yet. What's normal and acceptable in this society versus others? I don't know if I can answer that one, to be honest. Let's see. Oh, okay. Okay, I already have a couple I want to answer in this category. So, who are the persons or groups to which one automatically has a duty simply by being born? This is quite simply the royal family. Not only do they exhibit a governmental or traditional role to rule the nation, they are also required to be conscripted. Spell conscripted wrong. In Valmoran society, there is a desire or necessity for the ruling class to be subject to the defense of all other social classes to justify their legitimacy to rule over them. Unlike in other monarchist states that decree that God or another higher authority has granted them the right to rule, it is through the will of service and protection of the nation that grants the Valmoran royalty their legitimacy. Who are this culture's historic heroes and villains? This is a fun one, I think. We're going to have to refer to some other docs for this, I believe. So we'll just run through and I will briefly touch on a few heroes and maybe villains if I have them. So heroes, villains. Let's start with Aldrich was a chieftain who, as of recently, is confirmed to have actually existed and founded the precursors to the Valmercian city states. Excuse me. But however, what is known about him that makes him heroic is often aloof in myth, such as fighting a reincarnation of the devil. Who else can we talk about? Oh, let's talk about villains real quick. Uram and Tabitha, both rulers from the Baloskal dynasty, which present in the second millennium BDE. These were driven out by Shurag Vijovi, united Valmercian clans to defeat the Balaskal and retake Worldbuilding. Let's get more into more contemporary figures, I think. Oh, here we go. So King Baimar III from the House of Lokon, the Lokon dynasty, died discovering a double-headed eagle on the slopes of High Morochin. He is one of two, I believe, Valmoran rulers to be canonized as a saint. Because he got high and was sick, there you go. We kind of talked about Mazarym already, St. Mazarym, he'll be there. Guys, I'm a hero. What can I say? Oh, here we go. We talked about Dolovar. He's definitely a very popular hero. We didn't really talk about his, I guess, protege, who he was looking after. That would be Queen Ayla, ruler of Valmercia and warrior during the end of the 100 Years' War. As far as other heroes, Deogam and Lazarvi, Atsuri, rulers of Vordoin. Deogam conquered Vordoin. Lazarvi unified Valmora. I included them together because I'm trying to shift away from rulers. I do have at least one more ruler to talk about, though. But I want to mention this guy first. Major Simon Burim Dushan, who claims descendants from one of the older Valmercian houses, was the leader of the Valmoran forces during the Vulcan War. The last ruler I want to mention is Tamovalan I, aka Tamola. Popular, in fact considered the most popular emperor in Valmoran history, ruling over the nation during both world wars. But he died shortly after the Second World War. Ugh. As far as other characters we can talk about, who else is very popular? Ooh, okay, you know what we gotta find? Alrighty. Dude, thank you for joining me, and I'm glad you liked it. Thank you, thank you. See you later. As far as villains, we're going to talk a lot about the Parlichevs were the central figures, family that ruled over the Valmoran People's Republic. So they're often villainized, especially in contemporary history. But a lot of people think they were pretty good. So depending on where you stand, they're heroes or villains. I'm going to include them in villains because the vast majority of Valmorans would say they don't like those guys. As well as the ruler of the Brantz estate, whose name I forget. When we talked about earlier in the stream and in the video about the brief history of Hjordland. As a member of the Big Five, excuse me, the allies of the Big Five, the Brenta state was a rump state created by the Dynastans, which encouraged a lot of very violent extremists to take root, and very horrible things happened in the Brenta state. And so this ruler, whose name I can't forget, oh my god, whose name I've forgotten at this moment, very, very unliked, especially of Valmora. And then here's another Civil War figure. His name is Jan Hendrik Vaglar, who disguised himself as a Valmoran People's Republic general known as Boris Boyanich. Vaglar was actually a Clinarian liaison, which thus confirmed that the Clinarians were involved in the Valmoran Civil War, supplying the VPR with supplies and men. VPR, Clinarian liaison. There'll probably be a day when we talk about the Valmoran Civil War, a very well-known, infamous event that also involved a lot of other nations and people. So there you go. Any other villains or heroes I can talk about? I really want to find more villains to talk about. I don't know. Let's see. We'll leave that more open for later. Let's see if we can answer like one or two more questions. Arbiters of ethics as opposed to law. Who are the social arbiters? Ditto. I think I want to interpret this question as, let's see. Give me 1 second. So when I interpret this question, I think of like, who would people look more to enforce or inspire this sort of ideal ethics and societal values in Elmoran culture? And I would say there is a special unit of the military which exhibits several different functions, and they are known as the Justicars. You would often associate the Justicars as arbiters of law, but they also exhibit a lot of societal and ethical obligations and what's the word? Enforcement. They tend to set the standard for what is expected, or at the very least, what is to be expected of a life of service, as well as dispense their dispense their wisdom and positive demeanor means for them and could mean for you to be a Valmor. The Justicars are a very specific branch of the Moran legions, often presiding as royal guards. They also tend to, they tend to patrol important government facilities as well as popular tourist destinations. Justicars are either armed and pacing a particular part of the city, or otherwise roam around and entertain the masses. Leave this car real quick. This is often where the comparison to other royal guards and real cultures ends. Oftentimes you'll find there are very serious but colorfully and ornately uniformed guards in these countries. With the Justicars, that is the case. However, there are times that they exhibit a more friendly disposition, and a lot of Justicars are in fact very talented musicians and entertainers as well. So that's where that comes from. And so, because of this position and the influence they tend to carry, they're often considered to be very knowledgeable and influential in regards to the ethics one should embrace as being basically what defines a Valmoran with this context. They try to be as impartial as possible with regards to more personal identities, but it's more of like going back to the idea of like honor and chivalry, which is embraced especially highly in this country, mixed in with more modern and I would say more liberal ideas. There's some religious questions which are very interesting, but I don't know if I want to answer those right now. We could answer these questions, but I might just leave it at that, unfortunately. I think we'll definitely come back to this, and hopefully when we come back to it, I'll be able to answer more of these questions easier. But overall, this was a very interesting and insightful questionnaire. I've got a bookmark, so for later, absolutely, I'll be coming back to this, and it's also in the stream archive link as well. It's also, if you're watching this from our Discord, it's there as well. So if you want to fill this out yourself, feel free. I think it's very interesting, highly recommended. But on that note, I think I'm going to end the stream there. Didn't really plan on playing anything for this Worldbuilding Wednesday afterward, but I'll be live tomorrow. And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a lot of fun, especially this Worldbuilding Wednesday. I don't know what I want to cover next week, but if you'd like to know when I go live, is it Twitch? Forget it. That doesn't exist. My bad. Here. I thought I made that command for some reason. That was weird. Twitch.tv/Mazarym. I don't know why it's censored. That's a little weird, I'll be honest. But you can also follow me on Twitter. Wait, why am I? Sorry, I'm like so out of it. I just totally linked the Twitch here on Twitch. It's Twitter. I can't read, as you can tell. Twitter.com/Mazarym. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow.